Excellent to be with you all again. I wish a little bit it was in we were back in Barcelona, um, but lucky for me, it's been nice weather in Amsterdam. Speaking of my context, I apologize in advance if you hear a little bit of loud buzzing. It's I live across from a boatyard, and they're usually quiet, but it seems that whenever I have a presentation, they decide to use some heavy tools. So sorry for that. So I have actually two presentations. I probably should get right to it because they're pretty thick with content. I will share my screen. Let me know if it's coming through okay. Yes, okay, so start slideshow. Okay, are you seeing a title screen? It all looks okay?
Well, perfect, thank you.
All right, so I'm calling this talk Emergence. The topics are biodesign, as was mentioned, bioart, and the start of a new kind of museum, some of the content of which relates to biodesign. So just a few more words about who I am. I'm in Amsterdam, but originally from New York City. I started, as Ludwig said, about 10 years ago, researching this phenomenon of using biology and biotechnologies to change design, usually to make it radically better or to have a different kind of impact and consider multiple species. We'll also, if we have time, talk about exhibition approaches. I've put together about 16 or so shows in different kinds of venues, some of them small, some of them big, with this content. And I've learned a few things about communicating it and how people respond to it and how it can be organized in a way that follows a few different philosophies or approaches. Before getting into examples and origins and the heavy things, here's just a short anecdote of interest coming out of the Netherlands, actually, in response to the emergence of drones and how sort of easy and cheap they are to maintain. This introduces numerous security risks you can imagine of places with handling toxic material or airports, for example. You don't want someone with one or multiple drones interfering with safety or security in such places. And solutions for this have been thought of many sorts, like using lasers or nets or other sorts of conventional technology. But a firm in Den Haag in the Netherlands has come up with a novel solution with biology to train eagles and hawks to treat drones as prey. And it's a fascinating kind of example of something like as they use still, of course, dogs to sniff for drugs and explosives. Now they're using birds at airports like the one in Amsterdam to repel drones should there be a problem. And this is a video from the perspective of a drone that enters such a space where the birds are guarding. Now, of course, the meaning of biology and design could be more friendly, and it should be, but I find this a funny example that is a good way to introduce the concept of biodesign, which I'll break down with a couple of examples. This is the cover of the book that Ferdinand mentioned from 2018. This is how it looks, the original. And to get to definition. So I've been asked many times how to think of this. I like to consider biodesign in three buckets. Those projects that are with, for, and about biology. And by way of example, first to address for biology, works like this, the living sea sculpture, is an attempt to make a foothold for corals and other species so that an ecosystem can emerge in a place. So design that is really, I mean, indirectly, of course, it serves humans, but its focus is non-human species and using design in an inventive way to achieve that, in this case, via the shape and the mechanism I think they run a small electric current through this, which helps the corals take hold. Then, of course, there's examples that I'm sure this is familiar. Stefano Borre, Vasco Verticale. Works like this certainly invite some critical reaction, and as they should. I won't get into that at this point in the talk, but suffice to say, this is also what I find is a vibrant example that communicates well to people the notion of that first category for biology. With biology is a whole nother set of kinds of design projects, including one like this, the mycelium chair from Eric Clarenbeek, which I believe has, in the last year, became part of the Vitra Design Museum collection of chairs. And there are variations on this. This is an exhibition that I helped put together in Turkey that included his work. Also using mycelium, this is an application for acoustic panels by an organization called Mogu. They're based in Amsterdam. They do their manufacturing in Italy. These are mycelium blocks that have been grown in molds and then arranged and colored using a special process. Also with biology, at the scale of architecture, there is work like the bioconcrete direction of research that began in, I think it was 2008, at TU Delft in the Netherlands, led by Henk Jonkers. And this is an application to use specialized extremophile microbes and embed them in wet concrete in such a way that when the material eventually weakens and cracks, those extremophiles animate and they start to secrete limestone. And that limestone effectively seals the cracks and extends the service life of the material. Also with biology are these examples. This one I think has become something like a classic from about 20 years ago, the Fab Tree Hab by the group Terraform One. This is a vision of how we can make, somewhat like the four biology examples, a foothold or a platform for lots of other species to thrive while constructing a house. That's how that would look. The third category is a bit blurry. So this is work that is about biology. And this encompasses all of these speculative projects that look to the future and try to imagine what it would be like if the next century is characterized by biotechnologies and technologies like CRISPR-Cas9. This is an image from a work that includes many renderings and a story. It's called Concrete Honey by Jeff Manow. And in the narrative, the bees are genetically modified so that they can secrete concrete instead of honey or in addition to honey. And the thinking is that if this proliferates and the bees escape control, they start to change and mutate, they may begin to print designs and augmentations to existing infrastructure in unexpected ways, and perhaps in 1,000 years, with humans long gone, or the legacy of humans architecturally might become this amalgamation of bee-created concrete structures, a bit like the pyramids left behind by a civilization that is gone. Also, about biology, I love these sort of works. This is from a series of studies by the artist Diana Shearer. And she experiments with grasses and grows them in molds with different patterns that are 3D printed. And in this case, hewing very close to the aesthetic of 19th century Art Nouveau, which I find super fascinating as it sort of creates this historical circle or historical alliteration with original Art Nouveau, which was itself a mimicry of the organic shapes and patterns in the world as a response to, partially as a response to industrialization. So those are the three categories that I find most useful for understanding biodesign. Then there are works that, areas of research that sort of blend these things The Institute for Biology in the Built Environment is located in Oregon, USA, at the University of Oregon at Eugene. And they work to map out what kind of microbes grow in what kinds of spaces and then under what conditions. And they sample everything from classrooms and bedrooms to bakeries and hospitals, with the hope that they can start to draw a correlation between what kind of healthy or pathogenic microbes grow in what kinds of environments. And then knowing that, the hope is that we might one day be able to make probiotic design or an architectural approach that supports the growth of the kinds of microbes that are conducive to good health. And what they've done creatively is to try to express to people who are sort of outside of the field the density and the ubiquity of microbes in space. They make a work like this, which I would say borders on the artistic, of what it looks like inside if you could see it, and they were magnified very much in architectural office, and how much living matter there is everywhere all around us, like almost like a jungle. And of course, the medium of video is very, very powerful to convey a lot of ideas at once. And in my view, a work like this, which has become a kind of science fiction classic film, starts to like cross this line of course, it's not really a work of design. Cinema is art, but I would say, being that it's about biology and it's done so much to develop public understanding of the public imagination around design and its implications when it comes to biology, it's an important work. So in the research that I was doing in the early 2000s, while I was trying to find design, I kept coming across these works of art, and that led me to write a second book that profiles 60 or so different artworks, art collectives that are making works that are really a bit more free than the definition of biodesign, of course, because they're artworks and they're not necessarily directed towards other people or directed towards function. They are, freely more expressive, in my view, than design, which must be directed towards and take in mind others. And just an example of a very strong work that is featured there is that of Uli Westphal, a Berlin-based artist who, among other things, he has created a series of images that are stitched together, photography that he did with this, as you can see, kind of focus and drama, as if these things were sculptures, but they're misshapen, or what we think of as misshapen, vegetables, fruits, and tubers that he finds in different farmers markets. And he brings them together in these great aesthetic arrangements. And so this is, this is photography on paper, right? It's not living matter, but it is about our relationship to biology and how we have these set expectations about different fruits and vegetables, that they should be a certain standard. And that, of course, is arbitrary and completely the product of advertising, whereas mutation and variation is the key driver of how these things came in the first place. And so why not, should they be celebrated and featured in such a way? So how I got involved in these two fields that are sort of parallel was in my own journey of learning how to make bread and wine from scratch, and to start to appreciate yeast for the so many things it could do and how little we actually know about it. Of the something like 300,000, I think, or so species that are estimated to exist, we've only sort of cataloged and analyzed about 1 or 2%. And if one species could be so useful to create this influence on, we could use it to create such an influence on culture and the rise of civilization, it's, yeah, fun to imagine what else could be possible with other species. This was an inspiration point for me, as was the work of Janine Benyus, of course, the biomimicry book and activities in Academy that I think started in 1997, the publishing of this book. Also Cradle to Cradle, first edition, I think it was in 2003. Also, it's just at the right place at the right time reading this, and it became a foundational block for the things I would find and wonder about. It occurred to me very strongly after 6 or 7 years after reading that book, when it was published, that since I found it so persuasive, and yet design wasn't being reformed to follow the principles. And I struggled with this, like, but why? It's so clearly made, the case is so clearly made here, and we need to do this, it's urgent. And of course it wasn't. And that led me to be a bit more interested in the more radical projects that just tried to come from the position of, well, what if we did it and it was already here, and here's a prototype. It's not economically viable, it may be technically impossible, but let's get a start on it. Let's see, we're okay on time. 15, okay. So one of the ways that I've learned to frame biodesign and the difficulties in its adoption is the legacy of modernism. In particular, the way in which we have prioritized aesthetics over function, and also become obsessed with the sanitation of spaces. This is the Seagram building, completed in 1958, designed by Mies van der Rohe, considered by many as the best example of 20th century architecture, or one of, and certainly it was influential in New York and in other places. Its facade, if you don't know, is actually non-functional. It's bronze that's been welded onto the facade of the building to mimic or sort of mirror the I-beams that are within its structure. And this is a bit of a closer look. And this, I think this aesthetic, part of it is succumbing to this fear of the organic. This is a picture from 1918 of patients at the Brooklyn Navy Yard suffering from the Spanish flu. I think now, of course, we're in a different world post-COVID, and we have a new consciousness and appreciation towards the importance of sanitizing, and we understand it in a different way. But I point out that there's this period of time where this experience in the early 20th century, 1916 through 18, of the Spanish flu helps underlie this fear that we've had, that's been almost hardwired into us, of that which we can't see and that which could make us sick or kill us. And a legacy of that has been the over-sanitation of spaces, some of the consequences of which are the rise of superbugs and infections that are untreatable. But our fear of that which we can't see, although it's been revitalized, I think, quite a bit by the whole experience of COVID-19, is in some ways receding, thanks to the study of the human microbiome and the progress that's been made in understanding what lives where on our bodies. To get deeper into this, I highly recommend this book of Ed Young that was published just around the time before COVID, about how we are basically complex ecosystems and that are changing all the time, that we're a series of species in motion. We think we're in charge of it all, but actually it's much more nuanced than that. In addressing this idea of people being afraid of biology, entering or being become a part of their industrial design or architecture that surrounds them, I quite like projects like this, and when I have the opportunity at exhibition, I try to include them. This is the Moss Table by Alex Driver and Carlos Peralta that utilizes the symbiotic relationship between microbes in the soil in these little pots and the mosses photosynthesis that releases organic compounds for them. And it's the kind of project that is just very clear what it does, and it looks nice, but it also includes, importantly, a species that is familiar, visible, and doesn't move quickly. Because these are factors that seem to me, in my interactions with the public, have helped people to get over some of their hangups about things like biodesign. As I always try to offer this as part of the a chapter in the book is downloadable for free. That's geared towards students, giving them resources like what to read, journals that are recommended to keep a watch on, and courses, awards, and other sorts of things that are happening in this field that students might take advantage of. And I have just a few images from exhibitions that I've worked on over the last years. It's in Biodesign show in Rotterdam, and in 2018 at the Nature, in collaboration with the Nature Lab at the Rhode Island School of Design in the US. So something that that was my experience once I had a book published and this all this content to offer as an exhibition to communicate with the public. I contacted as many museum directors and curators that I could find, and I couldn't get any, or only could get one of them interested in hosting me as a guest curator. And eventually I did, and it worked out, and there was an upswelling of interest in bioart and biodesign for exhibition. So that has gone well. But it always stuck with me that there wasn't a friendly landing pad for content that was like this, that was a bit on the edge at the time, and with an inexperienced curator. So that in part led me to start in the last year and a half via a board of directors, a new museum of 21st century design that highlights and collects design that has a positive impact on the environment or society. And it's deliberately bookended the year 2000 to the year 2100, which is also a reaction to how in most museums, what you experience in terms of their collection is, or what it consists of, is a kind of hodgepodge of things that different regimes of curators got interested in, along with gifts from wealthy donors or other people on the board who had design that they wanted to see honored or collected and stored. So without much of a thematic direction to it. The legacy of which is that there are tons of museums with huge warehouses that they have to maintain, climate control, and maintain in all kinds of ways. That's prohibitively expensive and is paid for, but usually at the cost of good public programming and the development of staff. So this is the mission. I'll just very briefly give you a peek at the website. We have started to build a collection that's virtual, that is about design that we're studying for the permanent collection that has some kind of positive impact that can be measured. And the project that is taking up a lot of our attention lately is about these museum collections and how to think of them differently. The exercise that we've come up with to do that is in conjunction with the curator. In this case, the first one that we're doing is at the Boijmans Museum in Rotterdam, is to look at their collection and assemble a group of objects from it and tell stories about them as if we were standing in the year 2100. So this opens up all kinds of interesting doors for critical perspective and for humor, um, taking the role of a sort of archaeologist or curator, looking at objects and puzzling over how people made things so wastefully or with such bad impact, whereas in their future, design has been reformed and architecture is totally different, and everything is required to have these positive impacts. So it's taking that perspective. Now, let me know if we have time. I could talk a bit more. I have a separate presentation that's about approaches to organizing exhibitions and what elements I try to include in them.
I would agree. So please go on.
Okay, so we're about. I just checked. We're about 25 minutes. So I think we're kind of on time. I will close this and just do a switch. Okay. Okay, you're seeing a different title slide? Okay. Okay, this we already covered. There's the book again. So I won't read all this out, but it's one point I'll just highlight from it is the notion that there was a time when landscape architecture wasn't a discipline. It was this, it was kind of loosely described as architects and planners collaborating with gardeners or botanists. And in the 20th century, then landscape architecture could arise as its own field. And I think something similar is underway. This is a list of 4 exhibitions that took different approaches to presenting this kind of content. These all 4 were right before COVID, between 2017 and 2020, in New York, Paris, and in Milano. Oh, in London. The first one, Broken Nature, was really an enormous show that included fascinating works that spanned many different approaches. And, did I go the wrong way? And it included some of what I would call bioart, as well as works of design and speculations of the future. The exhibition at the Centre Pompidou was titled Life's Factory. And this mainly focused on, it had focused on both art and design. And to me, this part of an element here that I found for me problematic was the darkness of the space and the presentation of works in a way that, I felt like it went in the direction of making the content seem like it was slightly edgy or dangerous, which is something I try to get away from. And in the exhibition in New York at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Museum was called Nature. Very extensive, over 100 items. And to me, this was presented very effectively with some organic forms, but in a very clean and inviting way. And they organized clusters of works that were based on intentions. So under these headings that you see here in the box, it was clear at the start of each section what the goal was of each of these works, which was, I found, a very helpful guide, given that there's so many different forms, functions, and approaches to the works in the show. And in between, there's a floor. The show is in 3 floors. And the 2 pieces of bread at the sandwich were contemporary works and things not in the collection. And then they centered it in the middle with this floor that was all selections from the permanent collection that were examples of biomimicry as well as biofabrication. In this show in London, this is the only one I didn't see. It was extensive in terms of the number of objects and organized in this way that was a bit similar to the Cooper Hewitt presentation in terms of its the look and feel. And one of its themes or its focuses was the impact of fashion and the ways in which it's problematic and exploits different sorts of biology, including humans. So in the process of exhibition making, I find it really helpful to do an exercise that I've learned called an instant curation of objects, creating a small set, and then picking those apart to see like why you chose them or why your team chose them together. And then through that exercise, I like to define different themes that are possible or that could group together some of your selections. And in this case, this was a show that was being considered for a museum. I articulated out all these different ways or threads that could become a unifying theme to present the content, to present the works of design. I won't read all of these, but you can kind of just take a look at the headings and see how within this field there are really a broad number of important, urgent sectors to discuss in the foreground. And then separate from the themes, I think of taxonomies. And one that I just mentioned before that was at the Cooper Hewitt was to present works organized by intention. Another way, of course, that is probably familiar to all of us from seeing exhibitions is by discipline, the kind of classic splits between things like industrial design, graphic design, and urban planning. Categories of use is an organization approach that seems to have become more popular in the last years. And then applied, let's say you select one from the other group. So within that, you also kind of follow a sequence, potentially. One, of course, the classic museum method is chronological. So within each of those groups, things would be arranged that way. In this particular field, there's a question of, can this function actually happen, or can this object or this thing actually exist? So one way to organize the works is by their feasibility. And then the nonlinear, which I quite like, the juxtapositions and the highlighting serendipity between things that either share a design approach or a form. And then when it comes to biological works, there was an approach that was developed with my curatorial team in 2018 at the Rhode Island School of Design, where we found a way to express visually this notion that the organisms were not just materials or tools, but they were approaching the status of collaborators in the making of these things. And so we developed this key system of different, briefly explaining what the different species were, and then stamping these on the labels that presented the works in such a way. So that more or less covers where I was going. What follows are some examples of works that could be used in exhibition, but I think there was a lot there in that last 38 minutes. So I will stop sharing screen. And I'm back.